When people spoke about Daniel Okoye, they used words like power, brilliance, and destiny. At 38, he was one of the youngest billionaires in Lagos, a man who had built a technology and logistics empire from the dust of a crowded neighborhood and the hunger of impossible dreams. His face appeared on magazine covers, his speeches were quoted by politicians, his cars were escorted through the city like moving declarations of success. He lived in a vast white mansion overlooking the water, attended elite charity galas, and shared his life with a woman so elegant that the media called them the golden couple of West Africa. From the outside, Daniel's life looked complete. He had the money, the status, the influence, and the beautiful wife. He had the kind of life people prayed for in secret and envied in public. But some lives shine so brightly on the surface that no one notices the cracks forming underneath. Before we go further, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. The night everything changed, Lagos was drowning in rain. Daniel had left a late business meeting in Victoria Island long after midnight. The roads were slick, the sky was angry, and the headlights on the highway looked like broken stars smeared across wet glass. His driver had offered to take the wheel, but Daniel, restless and exhausted, had wanted the silence of being alone. He wanted to think. He wanted to breathe. He wanted, for once, to escape the noise of money. Then, in one terrible second, the world spun. A trailer ahead of him swerved unexpectedly. Daniel jerked the steering wheel. His car skidded hard, struck the guardrail, and flipped with a scream of metal that tore through the storm. When everything stopped, rain was pouring through shattered glass. Blood ran warm down the side of his face. He tried to move his legs. Nothing happened. At the hospital, the monitors beeped with cruel calmness while the smell of antiseptic filled the room. Daniel drifted in and out of sleep for 2 days. Each time he opened his eyes, he saw pale ceiling lights, worried nurses, and shadows moving behind curtains. On the third morning, the doctor finally sat beside his bed, folded his hands, and spoke the words that would divide Daniel's life into before and after. His spine had been severely injured. The surgery had saved his life, but the damage was extensive. Recovery would be uncertain. Maybe he would walk again, maybe he would not. Months of therapy lay ahead. Pain would become a companion. Patience would become a necessity. Nothing was promised. Daniel stared ahead, numb and silent. For a man who had spent his whole life outrunning poverty, humiliation, and fear, the idea of being trapped inside his own body felt more brutal than death. Wealth had always given him solutions. This time, it only gave him a larger hospital room. His wife, Zuri Okoye, wept beside his bed in those early days. She held his hand so tightly that the nurses had to remind her to let him rest. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her voice trembled with devotion. She said all the right things. She told him they would fight this together. She told him he was still the strongest man she knew. She told him she would not leave. Daniel wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But pain has a way of revealing the truth hidden inside people. At first, Zuri stayed close. She answered calls, supervised the nurses, and spoke gently in front of visitors. But once the flowers began to wilt and the sympathy visits became less frequent, something in her changed. The tenderness slowly dried up. Her patience turned thin. Her eyes stopped meeting his for long. She became more concerned with her appearance than his therapy schedule, more interested in social events than the man lying in recovery. After Daniel was discharged and brought home in a wheelchair, the mansion no longer felt like a reward for success. It felt like a museum built around a wounded king. The home that once hosted laughter, music, and expensive gatherings became strangely cold. The hallways echoed, curtains remained closed. Staff moved quietly, sensing the tension that hung in the air like dust before a storm. Daniel's bedroom was converted into a private recovery suite. Medical equipment appeared near the walls. A physical therapist visited 3 times a week. There were ramps where steps used to be, grab rails where luxury once stood untouched. And Zuri hated every sign of it. She hated the pills lined up on the side table. She hated the slow routine of bathing and therapy. She hated the wheelchair parked beside the bed. But most of all, she hated what Daniel's weakness did to her image. Within a month, she began going out again. First, it was short dinners with friends. Then it became charity functions, fashion events, late-night lounges, and private parties that stretched until dawn. Her social media filled with designer gowns, champagne glasses, and forced smiles under golden lights. In every picture, she looked flawless. In every picture, she looked alone. Daniel noticed the pattern before he admitted it to himself. When he called her at night, she often didn't answer. When she came home, it was with perfume that didn't belong to their house and laughter that didn't belong to their marriage. If he asked where she had been, her eyes turned cold. If he asked her to sit with him, she found a reason to leave the room. One evening, when his back pain was so bad he could barely breathe, Daniel asked her not to go out. "Just tonight," he said quietly. "Please stay." Zuri looked at him from the mirror as she adjusted an earring that caught the light like a blade. She was wearing a black dress that clung to her like smoke. "Daniel," she said, her tone clipped, "I can't bury myself alive because you had an accident." He blinked, stunned by the cruelty. "I'm your husband." "You were a man in constant need," she replied. "That is not the same thing." He felt the words land like stones inside his chest. When he tried again, his voice breaking, she turned to face him fully. Her beauty had become something sharp, something merciless. "I am still young," she said. "I still have a life. I will not spend my best years sitting in dark rooms, listening to therapy plans and medicine alarms. If you need help, hire someone, a nurse, a caregiver, a maid. But stop asking me to play saint." That night, after she left, Daniel sat alone in the half-dark and listened to the silence pressing against the windows. The city beyond the gates buzzed with life. Somewhere, people were dancing. Somewhere, couples were laughing over dinner. Somewhere, dreams were beginning. In Daniel's mansion, hope was quietly dying. 2 days later, an advertisement was posted for a live-in house assistant and caregiver. The job required someone trustworthy, patient, discreet, and able to assist with meals, household routines, and light personal care. Few applicants lasted through the screening process. The salary was generous, but the environment was intimidating. Rumors had already spread. The billionaire in the mansion was broken, the marriage was unstable, and the house carried the sadness of a funeral. Then, Imani and Lovu arrived at the gate with one small travel bag and a heart full of fear. Imani was 24. She came from a village outside Enugu and had learned hardship before she had learned comfort. When she was 6, a fire tore through the rented room where her parents slept. By sunrise, she was an orphan. She was passed from one relative to another like a burden wrapped in a child's body. Some homes tolerated her, others used her. One aunt made her scrub floors until her fingers cracked. One uncle drank too much and shouted too often. One family fed her last, as if hunger were a lesson she needed. Still, Imani survived. She survived by listening more than speaking, by reading old school books someone once threw away, by whispering prayers when nobody was looking, by telling herself that one day, life would stop testing her and start opening its hand. She dreamed of studying nursing. She dreamed of wearing clean white shoes, caring for people with dignity, and earning enough money to build a home no child would ever be afraid to enter. But dreams cost money, and money was the one language life had refused to teach her. So when she heard about the position in Lagos, she took the overnight bus without hesitation. The gate to the Okoye mansion rose slowly before her, tall and silent, guarded by cameras and men in dark suits. She looked down at her worn shoes and tried not to tremble. The compound was enormous. Palm trees lined the driveway. A fountain shimmered in the center like something from a luxury hotel. Cars with polished bodies sat under a covered bay. Everything about the place spoke of abundance. Yet the deeper she walked inside, the more she felt something else. The house was beautiful, yes, but it was the beauty of a place that had forgotten warmth. Marble floors, enormous windows, art imported from Europe, candles no one bothered to light. It felt expensive, but not happy. Grand, but unloved. The air itself seemed heavy. A senior house manager led her upstairs and stopped at a large wooden door. "Mr. Okoye does not like noise," he said. "Do your work well, speak respectfully, and do not involve yourself in family matters." Imani nodded. Her palms were damp. The door opened. Daniel sat near the window in a wheelchair, dressed in a plain gray shirt and dark trousers. Without the glow of public appearances, he looked different from the man she had seen online. Leaner, tired. His beard had overgrown slightly. His eyes carried the stillness of someone who had been hurt too deeply to waste energy pretending. Yet there was something powerful about him, even in silence, something unbroken behind the exhaustion. Imani lowered her gaze respectfully. "Good afternoon, sir." Daniel studied her for a moment, then dismissed the house manager with a slight gesture. The room quieted. "You are the new assistant?" he asked. "Yes, sir. My name is Imani." "You look nervous." "I am," she admitted softly. He almost smiled. "Most people are when they come here." Imani hesitated, then answered with more honesty than she had planned. "I am not afraid of you, sir. I am afraid of failing in a place this big." That caught his attention. For the first time in days, something flickered in Daniel's expression. Not joy exactly, but interest. "What makes you think you won't fail?" She lifted her chin. "Because I know what it means to need help. People who know pain learn to be careful with other people's." Daniel looked away toward the rain-streaked glass for a long moment. Then he nodded toward the chair near the wall. "Sit." Imani sat carefully. "The work will be demanding," he said. "Meals on time, medications tracked, the house kept orderly. I do not tolerate gossip, stealing, or dishonesty. If my wife gives you instructions about the household, you will follow them unless they conflict with my care." "Yes, sir." He paused. "And one more thing. Do not pity me." Imani's voice was gentle but steady. "I wouldn't insult you like that." The answer landed in the room with quiet force. Daniel turned back to her fully, surprised. Something about her presence felt unfamiliar in a house full of masks. She was plainly dressed, unadorned, carrying no perfume of ambition. But her eyes held a calm sincerity he had not seen in a long time. "You may start today," he said. Her room was in a smaller wing behind the main house. To Imani, it felt like grace. The bed was simple but clean. There was a wardrobe, a reading lamp, and a window overlooking the servant garden. She set down her bag, touched the bedspread with careful fingers, and whispered a thank you prayer under her breath. That evening, she prepared Daniel's dinner herself after learning his dietary restrictions from the nurse's notes. Grilled fish, soft yam, vegetable broth. She seasoned everything lightly and carried the tray upstairs. Zuri was in the downstairs lounge when Imani passed through. The woman looked like a magazine cover brought to life. Long legs, silk robe, expensive jewelry catching the light. But her eyes were cold as she scanned Imani from head to toe. "So, this is the village girl they hired," Zuri said, not bothering to hide her disdain. Imani bowed her head respectfully. "Good evening, Ma." "Remember your place," Zuri replied. "You are here to work, not to become familiar. And don't ever mistake kindness for permission." "Yes, Ma." Zuri sipped her drink and waved her away like smoke. Upstairs, Daniel ate in silence for the first few minutes. Then he looked down at the tray, then at Imani. "Did you cook this?" "Yes, sir." He took another bite. "This tastes like actual food," he said dryly. Imani laughed before she could stop herself, then quickly covered her mouth. "I'm sorry, sir." To her surprise, Daniel didn't frown. He simply watched her, and something softer entered his eyes. "What is your name again?" "Imani." "Faith," he said, recognizing the meaning. "A strong name." She gave a small smile. "It was my mother's favorite word." Daniel looked at her differently after that. Over the following days, Imani moved through the mansion like a quiet current, bringing order where neglect had settled. She learned Daniel's medicine schedule, his meal preferences, the exercises prescribed by the therapist, the exact way to position pillows so his back hurt less at night, the books he liked beside the bed, the silence he preferred in the mornings, and the low gospel instrumentals that calmed him during long afternoons. But what Daniel noticed most was not her efficiency. It was her presence. She never treated him like a burden. She never flinched at the routine of care. She spoke to him with respect, but not fear. When he was short-tempered from pain, she did not react with pride. When he withdrew into silence, she did not fill the room with meaningless chatter. She seemed to understand that healing was not always loud. One morning, just before sunrise, Imani was wiping down the upstairs hallway when the front door opened quietly. Zuri entered barefoot, holding her high heels in one hand. Her makeup was slightly smudged. Her perfume was too strong for that hour. Her hair, usually immaculate, was loose in a way that did not come from sleep. She froze when she saw Imani. "What are you looking at?" Zuri snapped. "Nothing, Ma. Good morning." Zuri hissed under her breath and walked past without another word. Imani kept cleaning, but a deep unease settled over her. That same morning, Daniel asked to be moved nearer the balcony doors. His voice sounded dull, as if he had not really slept. "You're awake early," he said when he noticed Imani had already finished half her tasks. "I like the quiet before the house starts pretending," she said. The words escaped before she could stop them. Daniel actually laughed, a rough, tired laugh, but real. "Before the house starts pretending," he repeated. "That is exactly what this place does." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to sit outside today, sir, just for a little while? The rain has cleared." He looked at the open balcony doors as if they belonged to another life. "I haven't been in the garden since I came home." "Then maybe today is a good day to begin." He studied her face, perhaps expecting pity, perhaps finding only patience. "All right," he said. Imani helped him into the chair more carefully than any nurse had done. She wrapped a light blanket across his knees and wheeled him down the ramp to the garden behind the house. The morning air was cool and fresh. Birds moved through the hibiscus hedges. The scent of wet earth rose softly after the night's rain. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. "I forgot what morning felt like," he said. Imani stood beside him. "Sometimes people don't need miracles first. Sometimes they just need sunlight." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Did someone teach you to say things like that?" She smiled faintly. "No, hard days did." That became the beginning. From then on, Daniel started asking to go outside more often. At first, they sat in silence beneath the neem tree. Then he began to talk. Not about business, not about money, but about the childhood he rarely mentioned in interviews, about his mother selling fruit by the roadside, about studying under a streetlight when electricity failed, about promising himself that one day he would own enough to never feel helpless again. Imani listened the way lonely people need to be listened to, fully. In return, she told him pieces of her own story. Not dramatically, not for pity. Just enough for him to understand how a young woman could carry both sadness and gentleness in the same breath. She told him about the fire, about being moved from house to house, about the old science textbook she kept for years, reading by torchlight because she loved anything that explained how the human body survived. "You wanted to become a nurse," Daniel said one afternoon. "Yes. What stopped you?" She smiled sadly. "Poverty usually arrives before possibility." The words stayed with him. As weeks passed, Daniel changed. He asked his physical therapist harder questions. He pushed through exercises instead of avoiding them. He began reviewing company reports again from his tablet. He held conference calls from his study. He requested newspapers, market summaries, and updated financial statements. The men on his board, who had quietly assumed he was fading from relevance, suddenly found him alert again. Pain still visited him. Sleepless nights still came. But a spark had returned. Zuri noticed it too, and she did not like it. She had grown comfortable around Daniel's helplessness. It made him easier to dismiss, easier to control, easier to embarrass behind closed doors while still wearing his surname in public. But now he was watching again, thinking again, asking questions again. One afternoon, when she found Daniel and Imani laughing quietly over an old story in the garden, her face darkened. "What exactly is happening here?" she demanded. Imani stood immediately. "I only brought him outside for air, Ma." Zuri turned to Daniel. "You should have asked before leaving the room. What if something happened?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I am not a child." Zuri's eyes flashed, but she swallowed whatever harsher words rose to her lips. From that day, her dislike of Imani sharpened into something active. She began criticizing small things, the way the room was arranged, the timing of meals, the folding of linens. If she crossed paths with Imani in the hall, there was always a sting waiting in her voice. "Orphan," she muttered once under her breath, just loud enough to wound. "Village girl," she said another time. "People like you always forget their place." Imani endured it in silence. She had survived worse than contempt. But what troubled her more was what she started noticing outside the house. Once, while picking up medication from the pharmacy, she overheard two women gossiping in line. "Isn't that Daniel Okoye's wife?" one asked, staring at a tabloid screen on her phone. "The same one," the other replied. "Always at Sapphire Lounge with that man." "What man?" "That tall one with the scar near his eyebrow, Cabello something. Everyone knows them." Imani looked away, but her chest tightened. Another night, she happened to glance out from the kitchen window and saw Zuri stepping into a dark SUV parked just beyond the gate. A man leaned over from the driver's side to open the passenger door. Even from a distance, there was something intimate in the ease between them. Later, Daniel asked quietly, "Did she come home?" Imani hesitated. "Not yet, sir." He nodded once and said nothing more. That silence hurt her more than anger would have. A few days later, Daniel finally confronted Zuri. She was removing her jewelry in their dressing room when he wheeled himself to the doorway. "Who is he?" Daniel asked. Zuri did not turn around. "I don't know what you mean." "The man in the SUV, the clubs, the early mornings. Stop insulting me with lies." She looked at him through the mirror, and the coldness in her expression made the room feel smaller. "You want honesty?" she asked. "Fine. Honesty is that this marriage ended the night your body failed you." Daniel's fingers tightened on the armrest. She turned fully toward him now. "I married a force," she said. "A man who filled rooms, a man who moved mountains. Not this, not wheelchairs, not medicine, not weakness." His throat tightened. "So that is all I was to you? Strength and status?" Zuri gave a bitter little laugh. "Don't be naive. Love without comfort is a speech poor people use to survive." Daniel looked at her as if he no longer recognized the woman standing before him. "You promised you would stay." "I did stay," she said, "didn't I? I just refused to die with you." Those words followed him long after he wheeled himself away. That night, Imani found him in his study, staring at the dark screen of his laptop, shoulders tense, eyes hollow. She set his tea beside him gently. "Sir?" After a while, he spoke. "Do you know what hurts most?" She waited. "I think part of me knew who she was all along. I just believed my love would make her become better." Imani lowered herself into the chair across from him only after he nodded. "Love doesn't always change people," she said softly. "Sometimes it only reveals them." Daniel looked at her for a long time. Then, for the first time, he allowed himself to cry in front of someone. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet, devastating tears of a man grieving a marriage that had been dead long before he accepted it. Imani did not rush to speak. She simply stayed there, a witness to his pain. And in that gentle silence, Daniel felt less alone than he had in months. The following week marked a turning point. Daniel called his lawyer, Bayo Akinle, to the house. He also contacted his head of corporate security and asked for private access logs, vehicle footage, and spending summaries linked to household accounts. If Zuri wanted war dressed as luxury, he would no longer fight with blindfolded eyes. Yet even as he began taking control, he refused to let bitterness consume his healing. He returned to therapy with a grim determination. He practiced transfers, upper body strengthening, and assisted standing. Every inch of progress cost pain. Sweat soaked through his shirts. Some days he nearly collapsed from frustration. Other days he clenched his jaw so tightly that the therapist told him to breathe before he broke his own teeth. But he continued. Imani became his steady encouragement, not in sugary words, but in stubborn faith. "One more," she would say when he wanted to stop. Again, she whispered when his muscles shook. "You are not finished," she told him after one hard session left him furious. Sometimes he thought her faith in him was unreasonable. Sometimes it was the only thing carrying him through. As Daniel slowly reclaimed pieces of himself, Zuri grew more desperate for control. One evening, she called Imani into the sitting room with an unexpectedly warm smile. "Sit," Zuri said. Imani obeyed cautiously. Zuri poured juice into a crystal glass and spoke in a voice so sweet it felt unnatural. "Tell me something, Imani. Do you ever think about your future? Real future, not just cleaning and serving." Imani blinked. "Yes, Ma. I heard you wanted to study." Imani's heart stirred. "I once hoped to. What if I could help with that?" Zuri asked. "Tuition, travel, maybe South Africa, maybe Kenya. Somewhere you could finally become something more." For a second, hope rose before caution could stop it. "You would do that for me?" Zuri leaned forward. "Of course. I am not as cruel as people think. I reward loyalty." Her smile thinned. "I just need a small favor in return." A cold feeling slid through Imani's stomach. Zuri reached into her handbag and placed a tiny folded sachet on the table between them. "Mix this into Daniel's dinner tonight." Imani stared at it without breathing. "What is it?" "Medicine," Zuri said smoothly. "Something herbal. It will calm him. He has been so tense lately." "Then why not give it to him yourself?" Because Imani had asked the wrong question, the mask fell instantly. Zuri's face hardened. "Because he trusts you." Imani stood. "I can't do that." Zuri stood too, stepping closer until her perfume felt suffocating. "Listen to me carefully," she said, voice low and dangerous. "Girls like you get one chance in life, and I am handing you yours. Refuse me, and you will leave this house with nothing. No job, no recommendation, no future. Worse, I can make people believe you stole from us. Do you understand how fast doors close on poor girls accused by rich women?" Imani's hands trembled. "Ma, please." Zuri shoved the sachet into her palm. "Do it tonight, and if you tell my husband anything, I will ruin you before sunrise." Imani stumbled back to her room as if the floor had turned to water. For a long time, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the packet on the table under the weak, yellow lamp. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She had been threatened before. She had been powerless before. But never like this. Never with another person's life resting in her shaking hands. She wrapped the packet in tissue, slid it into an envelope, and hid it deep inside her bag. Then she knelt on the floor. "God," she whispered, tears slipping down her face. "I have no one. Please show me what is right and give me the courage to survive it." The next morning, Daniel noticed her unease immediately. He was finishing breakfast when he looked up and said, "Something is wrong." Imani forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I'm fine, sir." "No," he said quietly. "You are afraid." She said nothing. Daniel wheeled closer. "Has someone threatened you?" Her lips parted, then closed again. Fear battled with conscience inside her. Zuri's warning echoed through her head. Ruin, lies, closed doors, no future. But Daniel's face held not authority in that moment, only concern. "Come with me to the garden," he said. Outside, the morning was bright but gentle. They settled beneath the neem tree where so many honest conversations had already taken root. Daniel waited. At last, Imani reached into her bag with trembling fingers and handed him the envelope. "She told me to put it in your food," she whispered. Daniel's expression changed instantly. "Who?" Imani's voice broke. "Your wife." For several seconds, the only sound was wind moving softly through leaves. "She said it was medicine, but she threatened me. She said if I told you, she would destroy me. I didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry. I am so sorry." Daniel took the envelope with slow, deliberate calm. He opened it. Inside was the sealed sachet. A dark stillness spread across his face. He looked at Imani, not with suspicion, but with something deeper. Gratitude, pain, fury held under control. "You did the right thing," he said. Her eyes filled. "What if she finds out I told you?" "She won't. Not yet." His voice became firm. "From this moment, you say nothing. You act normal. You are under my protection now." He called Bio immediately. The lawyer arrived within the hour with a trusted personal assistant. The sachet was sent to a private laboratory under urgent seal. Daniel also ordered a discreet review of household audio, financial transfers, and gate footage from the past 3 months. If Zuri had crossed into attempted murder, he intended to know how far the rot had spread. By evening, the report came back. The powder was not medicine. It was a slow-acting toxic compound designed to weaken organ function over time, especially in someone already on multiple medications. Symptoms could easily be mistaken for complications from recovery. Daniel read the report twice. Then he folded it carefully and set it down. The betrayal did not feel like shock anymore. It felt like confirmation. That night, while the mansion slept, he sat alone in his study with the city lights flickering beyond the window. He remembered the years he had loved Zuri with reckless generosity. The gifts, the vacations, the promises, the private tenderness no one else had seen. He remembered believing they were building a life, not a performance. Now he saw the truth in full. She had not merely abandoned him. She had decided his suffering was an inconvenience to eliminate. Something inside him hardened forever. The next day, when Zuri breezed into the kitchen and asked with false casualness, "Did he take it?" Imani kept her voice steady. "Yes, Ma." Zuri smiled, satisfied. "Good. Loyalty looks good on you." Imani bowed her head so Zuri would not see the disgust in her eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel moved quickly. He instructed Bio to finalize divorce papers and begin asset protections. A private investigator was assigned to follow Zuri and document her movements with the man identified as Cabello Maseko, a nightlife promoter with a history of fraud, assault allegations, and suspicious financial activity. Corporate security quietly traced unusual withdrawals routed through shell accounts that ultimately linked back to a property recently purchased in the outskirts of the city. The property was not in Zuri's name. It was in Cabello's. The investigator's report painted a filthy picture. Zuri and Cabello had been involved for months before Daniel's accident. They met at clubs, private villas, and cash-heavy businesses. She had transferred money to him repeatedly, often through intermediaries. Several messages recovered from a synced tablet suggested they had discussed life after Daniel in disturbingly practical terms. Daniel read every page. Imani watched him change. He became quieter, but sharper, less wounded, more deliberate. He no longer asked whether his marriage could be saved. That question had died. Instead, he focused on what must come next: protection, truth, justice, and survival. Yet he was not untouched by the pain. One evening, after signing the first set of divorce documents, Daniel sat back and closed his eyes. "I built systems to detect fraud in companies," he murmured, "but I let betrayal sleep beside me." Imani stood across from him, hands folded. "Trust is not stupidity," she said. "It only becomes dangerous when evil meets it." He looked at her with a softness that carried too much meaning. There were moments now when the air between them changed, not dramatically, not carelessly, but undeniably. It happened in small things: the way Daniel's eyes followed her when she left the room, the way Imani's voice softened when his pain returned, the way silence with each other no longer felt empty. Affection was growing there, cautious and frightened, because both of them knew how dangerous it was to name feelings too early. He was still married, even if only on paper. She still worked in his house. Both had been broken by life in different ways. Love, if it was what this was becoming, had no right to be selfish. So it remained unspoken. For a while. Then came the day Daniel nearly fell during therapy. He had insisted on assisted standing with the parallel bars. His legs trembled violently. Sweat rolled down his temples. Halfway through the motion, his weakened right side gave out, and the therapist shouted for support. Imani reached him just in time, bracing his shoulder as he collapsed back into the chair. Daniel slammed a fist against the armrest in frustration. "I am tired of fighting my own body." The room went still. Imani knelt in front of him without embarrassment, without fear. "Then fight with it," she said, eyes shining. "Not against it. Your body is injured, not your worth. Stop punishing yourself for surviving." The therapist quietly stepped out. Daniel stared at her. Something raw opened in his face. "Why do you care this much?" he asked. The question hung there, trembling. Imani looked down. "Maybe because, when everyone else looked at your wheelchair, I still saw the man inside it." Daniel's chest tightened. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it for one brief, dangerous second before gently pulling away. That night, he said the words neither of them was ready for. He was in his study when Imani brought in tea. The city was dark beyond the windows. The house seemed to hold its breath. "Stay," he said. She did. Daniel looked at her for a long time, then spoke with the calm honesty of a man who had already lost too much to lie again. "I think I am falling in love with you." Imani froze. "Sir." "Daniel," he corrected softly. "At least when we are alone." Tears rose in her eyes instantly, not because she didn't feel the weight of what he said, but because she did. "You must not say that," she whispered. "Not now." "Because I am still legally married?" "Yes." "And if I were not?" She closed her eyes. "Please don't ask me questions that weaken me." He did not move closer. He did not force the moment. He respected the trembling boundary between them. "I am not asking you for anything tonight," he said. "I only needed you to know the truth." Imani left the room with her heart in chaos. Unfortunately, houses that hold secrets also grow ears. Zuri had not heard the confession, but she had seen enough in recent weeks to understand the shift. Daniel was no longer emotionally dependent on her. Worse, he was recovering pieces of dignity through another woman's kindness. In Zuri's mind, that was an unforgivable insult. The confrontation came 2 days later. Daniel was in the main lounge when Bio arrived, carrying a folder thick with documents. Zuri descended the staircase in a gold silk dress, annoyed by the interruption. "What is all this?" she asked. Daniel's expression was unreadable. "Sit down, Zuri." Something in his tone made even her pause. She sat. Bio placed photographs on the coffee table, one by one. Zuri getting into Cabello's SUV. Zuri and Cabello holding hands outside Sapphire Lounge. Zuri at a private villa on 2 separate nights. Zuri meeting a courier, later linked to the poison sachet. The color drained from her face. Daniel, he raised a hand. Then Bio placed the lab report down. Then the financial tracing documents. Then the divorce papers. Zuri's mouth opened, but no words came immediately. You mocked my pain, Daniel said, voice low and lethal. You betrayed my marriage. You stole from my household. You conspired with another man while living under my roof. And when that was not enough, you attempted to poison me.
That is a lie,
She cried, standing abruptly.
That girl is manipulating you.
Imani, standing near the doorway, felt Zuri's hatred hit her like heat. Bayo remained calm. The chemical analysis is clear. We also have evidence of instruction, opportunity, and subsequent inquiries from you to confirm whether the substance had been administered. Zuri turned white, then red with rage.
You think you can destroy me?
She shouted at Daniel.
After everything I gave you?
Daniel laughed once, without humor. What did you give me, Zuri? Performance? She switched instantly from fury to tears. The transformation would have been impressive if it were not so late.
Daniel, please. I was confused. I was lonely. I made mistakes.
But poison? No, never. Cabello gave me that sachet and said it was a supplement. I didn't know. You expect me to believe that? She dropped to her knees dramatically. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle your accident. I was losing my mind. But I didn't mean for anything bad to happen. Please don't throw me away over one terrible mistake. Daniel looked at her in cold disbelief. I forgave your distance. I forgave your absence. I even forgave the affair in my heart before I had proof. But attempted murder is not a mistake. He signed the last page of the divorce packet in front of her. You have 48 hours to leave this house. Zuri stared at him as if she had finally discovered he was no longer weak. Her tears stopped. Her face changed. What rose in their place was something far uglier. This isn't over, she said. Daniel's eyes did not flinch. For your sake, pray that it is. She left the room shaking with contained fury. 2 days later, she walked out of the mansion with designer luggage, expensive sunglasses, and hatred burning in her chest. The tabloids would soon get hold of the story, but not before Daniel's team froze shared accounts and secured the company from any legal sabotage she might attempt. Imani thought the worst was behind them. She was wrong. Zuri moved into the house on the outskirts of the city, the same one Daniel's money had quietly financed through Cabello. The man welcomed her at first with false confidence and expensive whiskey, but tension quickly replaced romance. Without Daniel's money flowing freely, reality showed its teeth. They argued about money, about blame, about exposure. Cabello paced the living room like a caged predator, while Zuri raged about losing everything. He chose that girl over me, she spat. That servant walks around his house like she saved his life. Cabello narrowed his eyes. Maybe she did. Zuri threw a glass against the wall. I want them both to suffer. Cabello had spent years solving problems through intimidation. He knew people who frightened easily, people who disappeared for the right price, people who asked few questions. And his pride had now been wounded too. The loss of access to Daniel's wealth burned him more than he admitted. That night, he made a call. By the time the city settled into darkness, 3 masked men on motorcycles were heading toward the Okoye mansion. Inside the house, Daniel had been reviewing rehab notes while Imani cleaned up in the kitchen. The air felt still, unnaturally still. Then Imani heard it. A faint metallic sound near the back service entrance. Not loud, just enough to tell a careful person that something had shifted where it should not have. She turned off the kitchen light immediately. Her heart began to pound. She moved quickly through the dark corridor to Daniel's room and knocked once before slipping inside. Daniel, she whispered urgently. He looked up at once. What is it? I think someone is outside. Every trace of softness vanished from his face. He wheeled to the security console mounted near his desk and pulled up the external camera feeds. 3 shadowed figures were climbing the rear wall. Daniel pressed the silent alarm. "Come here," he said. Imani moved to his side. The house security system activated without audible sound inside the room, but triggered alerts to the armed response team living nearby. Exterior floodlights burst on across the compound. The intruders froze for half a second, then started moving faster. Daniel guided Imani toward the reinforced inner study, a room designed years ago for kidnapping threats against wealthy executives. The irony wasn't lost on him now. "Stay behind me," he said. She almost laughed through her fear at the absurdity of those words coming from a man in a wheelchair. But he meant them, and somehow, even in that moment, she felt protected. From the study monitor, they watched the response unfold. Security officers stormed the compound from 2 sides. One intruder tried scaling the wall back out and fell when a warning shot cracked into the stone beside him. Another dropped his weapon and hit the ground. The third made it halfway to the side gate before guards tackled him. Police arrived minutes later. Imani's legs shook so badly she had to sit. Daniel reached for her hand instinctively. She held on. "It's over," he said, though his own pulse was hammering. At the station, under pressure and faced with charges far heavier than simple trespassing, one of the captured men talked. He named Cabello. Phone records supported the claim. Payment trails began to surface. The order, investigators concluded, had been to terrorize the household, possibly kill the man in the chair and the girl who talks too much. By dawn, arrest warrants were being prepared. Cabello was picked up first. Zuri was arrested later the same day. When officers recovered damning call logs, voice messages, and deleted payment instructions tied to the attack. Faced with evidence, she blamed Cabello. Cabello blamed her. The truth rose between them like smoke no lie could contain. The case moved quickly because Daniel was not just wealthy, he was connected, careful, and now publicly sympathetic. Once the press learned that a prominent businessman recovering from a spinal injury had been targeted by his estranged wife and her lover, public outrage exploded. But Daniel did not celebrate. He was too tired for triumph. When he testified, he did so calmly. He described the accident, the marriage, the recovery, the poisoning attempt, the financial betrayal, and the home invasion. He did not exaggerate. He did not rant. He spoke like a man who had already buried illusions and now dealt only in facts. Imani also testified. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she told the court how Zuri had tried to bribe and threaten her. She described the sachet, the promises of school abroad, the insults, the fear, and the choice she made to protect Daniel, even when she believed it might cost her everything. In the courtroom, many eyes turned toward her with new respect. Zuri, dressed in pale prison clothing instead of silk, looked nothing like the woman from the magazine covers. Deprived of luxury, stripped of stage lighting and curated angles, she looked exactly what she had become: restless, bitter, and cornered. The judge's sentence was firm: attempted poisoning, financial conspiracy, criminal facilitation of violent trespass, and intended bodily harm. Cabello received a longer sentence because of his direct involvement with the hired men. Zuri received years enough to learn that beauty offers no immunity inside concrete walls. When the gavel fell, she broke down screaming. Not in repentance, in outrage. She shouted Daniel's name. She cursed Imani. She begged, then threatened, then wept. Officers led her away anyway. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed like lightning. Daniel ignored them. He turned to Imani, who stood quietly beside him in a simple blue dress, and said only, "Let's go home." For the first time, the mansion felt like a place that might one day deserve peace. Healing, however, did not arrive all at once. Trauma lingered. Nightmares came. Sudden sounds made Imani flinch. Daniel woke sweating some nights, hand reaching for the alarm that no longer needed pressing. Trust rebuilt itself, slowly, like bone. But there was also change. Without Zuri's chaos, the house breathed differently. Curtains were opened in the mornings. Music returned softly to the kitchen. Staff spoke more freely. Daniel's therapy advanced. He moved from assisted standing to supported steps with braces. The day he took 3 uneven steps between the bars, Imani cried harder than he did. "You're crying as if you're the one walking," he teased breathlessly. "In my heart I am," she replied, laughing through tears. He began funding a scholarship program for orphaned girls who wanted to study nursing and health sciences. He named the foundation the Imani Trust, though he pretended it was because the word meant faith, not because of her. She knew better. One evening, near sunset, months after the trial, Daniel asked Imani to walk with him in the garden. Not wheel him, walk with him. He moved carefully, with a cane and a discreet leg brace beneath tailored trousers. His progress was real now, not miraculous, not perfect, but earned through agony and discipline. Each step carried memory inside it. Every movement said, "I was broken, and I chose not to stay there." They reached the bench beneath the neem tree, the same place where truth had first started living between them. Imani sat. Daniel remained standing for a moment, looking out at the orange sky beyond the hedges. "When I first came here after the hospital," he said, "I thought my life was over. Not because I might never walk again. That frightened me, yes. But what truly destroyed me was believing I had become unworthy of love." Imani looked down. He continued, "Then you walked into this house, with one bag and more courage than anyone I had ever met. You fed me when I had no appetite. You spoke to me when I had no will. You told me the truth when lies could have protected you better. You reminded me that dignity can survive pain." His voice softened. "I gave you time because I needed to make sure whatever stood between us was clean, honest, and free from confusion. It is now." He lowered himself carefully onto one knee, not all the way, not recklessly, but enough to make her gasp. "Imani and Lovu," he said, opening a small velvet box. "I do not love you because you saved me. I love you because when I was hardest to love, you chose truth over convenience, kindness over ambition, and courage over fear. Will you marry me?" Tears flooded her eyes instantly. For a moment she could not speak. The girl who had once been moved from house to house, tolerated but not cherished, suddenly found herself seen with terrifying tenderness. "Daniel," she whispered, hands over her mouth. He smiled. "That is not an answer." She laughed through tears. "Yes, yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. Then, before either of them could say anything more, Imani knelt beside him and held his face as if it were the most precious thing she had ever touched. "I loved you long before I had the right to admit it," she confessed. "I was afraid of it. Afraid I was only a broken girl in a rich man's house, mistaking gratitude for love. But this, what I feel when I see you fight, when I hear you laugh, when I watch you choose goodness after evil, this is real. It has always been real." Daniel's eyes glistened. He kissed her forehead first, then her lips, gently, reverently, like a promise made in the presence of all their surviving wounds. Their wedding was held in the same garden months later. It was not the kind of extravagant ceremony magazines would have expected from a billionaire. There were no imported swans, no golden horses, no crystal chandeliers suspended over artificial lakes. Daniel no longer needed spectacle to prove abundance. Instead, the wedding was intimate and luminous. White flowers lined the garden path. Soft music drifted in the evening air. Staff who had witnessed the darkest days of the house stood smiling with tears in their eyes. The physical therapist attended. Bio attended. Even some children from the new foundation were invited, dressed in neat clothes and grinning as if joy itself had sponsored them. Imani wore elegance without excess. Her gown was simple,
graceful, and radiant against her dark skin. She looked like the answer to a prayer life had postponed for too long. Daniel stood waiting for her, cane in hand, posture steady, eyes full of awe. When she reached him, he forgot the guests, the music, the flowers, everything. Only she remained. Their vows were not dramatic. They were honest. Daniel promised never to confuse possession with love again. Imani promised never to let fear keep truth from their home. He promised to honor the strength that had carried her through suffering. She promised to love the man, not the image, whether standing tall or leaning on her shoulder. When they kissed as husband and wife, the garden filled with applause. But what lingered deepest was not celebration. It was peace. In the months that followed, the mansion transformed completely. The House of Silence became a house of healing.
One wing was converted into an education center for the scholarship girls during holidays. The kitchen became known for warmth instead of tension. Laughter traveled freely through halls that once only echoed with pride and bitterness. Daniel continued therapy and eventually walked short distances without assistance. On harder days, he still used his chair. Neither of them treated that as shame. Survival had taught them both that dignity is not measured by how a person moves across a room. Sometimes in the evenings, after meetings and foundation work were done, they sat under the neem tree and talked about the strange paths life had taken. Daniel would say, "If the accident had never happened, I might have remained surrounded by luxury and starved of truth." Imani would answer, "And if suffering had not chased me for so long, I might never have learned how to recognize a heart worth protecting." He funded her nursing education, but she insisted on earning her place through exams and study, not favors. When she was accepted into a respected program, Daniel celebrated like a proud husband and a humbled witness to perseverance. He often joked that she had once become his caregiver and would soon outrank every doctor who first treated him. She would laugh and tell him not to be dramatic. But at night, when she studied in the library and he watched her from the doorway, Daniel understood that what he admired most was not her gentleness alone. It was her refusal to let pain define the size of her future. As for Zuri and Cabello, they faded from public obsession with time. Newspapers moved on. Society found new scandals to chew. Prison walls reduced them both to names on systems that did not care about former glamour. The empire they once thought they could inherit continued to grow without them. Daniel never spoke of them unless necessary, not because he had forgotten, but because some chapters are not healed by repeated reading. They are healed by closing the book and building a better life afterward. Years later, people would hear parts of Daniel and Imani's story and call it unlikely. Some would call it poetic justice. Others would call it destiny. But if you asked them, the two people who had lived it, they would say something simpler. They would say that pain can empty a house, but truth can fill it again. They would say that betrayal may break the heart, but it also exposes what never deserved to live there. They would say that love is not proven by grand speeches under bright lights. It is proven in quiet rooms, during long recoveries, in difficult honesty, in the choice to protect someone when it would be easier to save yourself. And if you ever visited their home in the evening, you would no longer feel the chill that once haunted its walls. You would hear life. You would see young scholarship students laughing in the courtyard during mentorship visits. You would smell food coming from the kitchen. You would find Daniel walking slowly but proudly beside the woman who had once entered through those gates, carrying nothing but a small bag and a brave heart. You would see Imani in her nursing whites on some days, in simple dresses on others, and in every version of herself, she would look like what she had become. Not someone rescued by wealth, but someone honored by love. One dusk, after a long day, Daniel and Imani sat together in the garden as the sky turned amber and deep blue. He reached for her hand. "Do you ever think about the girl you used to be?" he asked. She smiled softly. "All the time." "What would you tell her if she could see you now?" Imani looked at the house, glowing warmly behind them, at the lights in the windows, at the trees moving gently in evening wind, at the man beside her, whose scars no longer frightened him. Then she answered. "I would tell her to hold on a little longer," she said.
I would tell her that not every house is built to wound you. Not every rich person is cruel. Not every ending is loss. I would tell her that one day she will be loved without being used, heard without begging, and chosen without fear. Daniel's eyes shone. "And what would you tell the man I used to be?" he asked. Imani leaned her head against his shoulder. "I would tell him that losing the wrong woman saved his life," she said, "and that the wheelchair never made him less of a man. It only revealed who had eyes to see him." Daniel laughed softly, then kissed the top of her head. Above them, the first stars began to appear. Inside the house, lights glowed warm behind open curtains. No more secrets. No more poison. No more footsteps creeping in at dawn with betrayal hidden under perfume. The walls that once watched sorrow now held mercy. The rooms that once magnified loneliness now sheltered purpose. The mansion had not changed because of money. It had changed because of truth, courage, repentance where possible, and justice where necessary. That is how some lives are rebuilt, not by erasing what happened, but by refusing to let darkness have the final word. And so, the story of Daniel Okoye and Imani Ndlovu was not remembered merely as the tale of a billionaire betrayed by his glamorous wife. It became something deeper than gossip, richer than scandal, more lasting than revenge.
It became the story of a man who learned that strength is not the absence of collapse, but the will to rise after truth burns everything false away. It became the story of a woman who carried kindness through suffering so faithfully that when the moment came, her courage became the bridge between death and life. It became the story of a house, once ruled by silence and performance, then redeemed by honesty and grace. And in the end, perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not that evil was punished, not that enemies were exposed, not even that love finally arrived, but that two wounded people, standing in the ruins of different pasts, chose not to become bitter. They chose to become home for each other. And maybe that is the lesson hidden inside this story. Life does not always break us to destroy us. Sometimes it breaks us to reveal who truly belongs in our lives. The people who stay during our darkest moments are often worth more than all the success, wealth, and applause in the world. Daniel lost his strength, his marriage, and the life he thought he knew. But in losing what was false, he found something real. And Imani, who spent years believing she was forgotten by the world, discovered that kindness and courage are never wasted. So if you're going through a difficult season right now, don't give up. Some of life's greatest blessings arrive after its hardest storms. This is Adrian, and thank you for spending these moments with me. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to African Soul Tales by Adrian and become part of our growing family. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story of love, hope, and humanity. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the people who save our lives are the ones who simply choose to stay when everyone else walks away.